for the New Urbanism is an organization of about 2,500 members. Most of them are architects or planners. Some of them are engineers or developers or local officials. Some of them are the local Jane Jacobs of their town. Like there's a woman named Beth Atkinson in Peoria, and she was trying to get she owned a building on the main street there, and they turned it into a one-way street and taken all the parking away, and she had this building and her customers couldn't park on the curb. And so she joined the CNU, and we all got to know her. She'd come to our meetings. And then she ran for alderman in Peoria and lost. And then she ran for alderman and won. And now she's the front runner for, I think, for their next mayor election. So, you know, there are all kinds of different people that get involved. But basically, it's about community design, and it's something that people should be involved in, community design. It shouldn't be left to just the people that are trained to be designers, be they architects or traffic engineers or whatever. People ought to have a big role in what's done, and that's what works best. You get the best outcome that way. Unless you have somebody come to a meeting, you know, like, well, anyway, I won't go into that. A lot of the talk about design is about saving energy, you know, new light bulbs or green roofs. This is the top of the Chicago City Hall, where I now live. I don't live in City Hall, but I live in Chicago. And the Green Building Council, you know, advocates all this stuff. And this itself, this environmentalism, ends up being a narrow thing that can't just be by itself. It needs to be involve the public and involve people that are critical of it. And when they gave an award, this is the HSBC bank operations headquarters for Midwest. You know, a lot of computers and all kinds of stuff in it. They moved it from a Metro stop, which is the suburban train thing in Chicago, right next to the Metro stop, and about a third of the employees took the train to work. And they moved it 3 miles away. And that's their business, you know, if they want to do that. We weren't really targeting the HSBC bank to make them feel guilty or anything. But the Green Building Council, which is supposed to be for saving the world, they gave them a gold award because they had turf on their roof, and they had tinted windows, and they had recycled carpeting, and you know, all this stuff. But they were making all these employees have to drive. So, whoops. Hey, you gotta help me, John. I just screwed this up.
That remote is tricky.
Yeah, I'm not gonna use it anymore once you fix it. So we complained to him. We said, what are you doing? Giving an award for this. It's their business if they want to do it, but you give them an award. That's wrong. And we joined with the Natural Resource Defense Council, another environmental group, and criticized them and said that they should not give them an award. So, and we showed them this map, you know, how we think of the city as the polluted area, and, you know, you have a lot of people and stuff going on, so maybe the air gets a little more polluted, but if you look at who creates the pollution from a standpoint of travel and how much energy they use, the people that live in the center of Chicago use about half the amount of energy per capita as the average American. And in Manhattan, in New York, it's about 1/3. It's because they don't drive very much, and they live close together, and they walk and do all this sort of stuff. And that has an environmental benefit. Now, it's not for everybody, but it's a good thing. It's for the ones who live in Manhattan. There's 2 million people living in Manhattan. And if they all spread out, they might move next to you, for example. You know, I mean, they just go all over the country, and they take up more space. So it's kind of nice that they're confined the way they are. But that's an environmental benefit to have these people live together, if they want to. But the government, and this is the main theme I'm going to talk about today, is that the government, the federal government, the state government in particular, not so much the locals, but they promote living far apart. They promote sprawl. And they spend a lot of money on it. And I'm not asking them to spend a lot of money. I'm asking them to spend less money. And one of the things that they really promote is separate use zoning. And I'll get into that later on, how that happened. It started happening in the 1920s. But if you look at this is Moreland Road at Blue Mound Road, west of Milwaukee, in Brookfield. And you've got the office in its own pod, and then you have the, the car wash kind of businesses have their own little ghetto. And then you have the various things, and then the retail's in the mall. And then the housing is separate completely, and apartments in one pod, and the houses in others. And then even the housing, all divided up by, the $250,000 houses, the $500, the $1 million houses. I don't think Brookfield has the $140,000 or $90,000 houses, but anyway, let me get this right. Oh, here we are. And what this does is it kind of changes the way cities are. If you think about cities, old cities from the early part of the 20th century or the late 19th century, everything's pretty much together. You go to Cashton or Lodi, Wisconsin. And you have the little main street and the coffee shop, and people can walk to it and all that sort of, and it's all there together. And what you get with the separate use zoning is it takes it all apart. It'd be like if you have a pizza pie, all the ingredients are on the counter, and if you keep them separate and eat them separately, so you eat the dough and the cheese and whatever, all separately instead of putting it together and baking it properly. And that's really what we've done to our cities. We've kind of dissembled the things that really make them work. So whereas the middle drawing there, which is a drawing by a guy named Leon Creer, who's from Luxembourg, but it shows the civitas. You've got the big building, the churches and the city hall and so forth, but they're mixed in with everything else, and that's what makes cities interesting. Another thing that really oppresses cities is when these rules are enforced individually. So you'll get certain kinds of, you have your water specialist, your plumbing section, your traffic engineer, your zoning coding specialist, and you make the developer go to all these places, and you wonder why you can't build anything that's like the kind of historic neighborhoods that people love. It's because the developer's going through all this process. And so one of the things we did in Milwaukee was we tried to change it and speed everything up. We went from the slowest development process to the fastest, but we didn't just do whatever they wanted. We had a code, a very urban code, called a form-based code, where the buildings had to be within the building envelope, and then within that, the developers could do what they wanted. And it led to a lot of redevelopment in downtown Milwaukee. Milwaukee's population is stabilized at about 600,000. Most Midwestern cities continue to go down. In fact, Detroit will have a smaller population than Milwaukee in the next census when it comes at current trends. And Detroit enforces separate use zoning. They still, even though they're in ruins and it's hard for them to attract redevelopment except in their downtown, which is showing some signs of recovery. Their zoning code tends to defeat it. In Milwaukee, we had a parking